Okay, good morning everyone, and can I welcome you to the 23rd meeting of 2018 of the Social Security Committee. Can I remind everyone present to turn off mobile phones or other devices, get them to silent mode please, so that we don't disrupt the meeting. And we have Gordon Lyndhurst here today, attending in place of Jeremy Balfour, who sent his apologies. Welcome again, Gordon. And our Deputy Convener, Polly McNeill, unfortunately can't make it this morning, and she sends her apologies. We move to agenda item 1, which is decision to take item in private. That would be item 3, consideration of evidence. Can we agree to take that in private? Okay, thank you. Move to agenda item 2, Scottish Government consultation. To inform final policy, the Scottish Government has lodged a consultation on the Young Carer Grant, which closes on the 10th of December. The committee agreed to hold an evidence session to inform any views which we might wish to feedback as part of that consultation. I have got a list of witnesses we have here this morning, but rather than me read out everyone's names, why don't we just go round the table, including MSPs, and we can just see who we are. So I'm Bob Doris, MSP, and I'm the convener of the committee.
I'm Alan Lindsay. I'm the Participation and Co-Design Director at Young Scot.
Mark Griffin, MSP for Central Scotland.
Alison Johnston, MSP for Lothian.
Lauren Bakery, Member of the Scottish Youth Parliament for Carers Trust Scotland.
Alistair Allen, MSP for Nahelan and Lanier.
Fiona Colley, Policy Manager for Carers Scotland.
George Adam, Paisley's MSP.
Louise Morgan, Director for Carers Trust Scotland.
I'm Michelle Ballantyne, I'm MSP for the South of Scotland.
Hi, I'm Wilma Murray and I'm the Senior Development Officer for West Lothian Young Carers Project.
Gordon Lyndhurst, MSP for Lothian.
So thank you everyone for coming along. We've got an hour or so to have a discussion in relation to the consultation on the Young Carers Grant. We'll move to our first line of questioning, Alison Johnston, MSP.
Thank you, Convener. I'm really pleased that we're here having this discussion this morning. It was a Scottish Greens manifesto commitment, and it was one that we were absolutely delighted when the First Minister, wholeheartedly was fully supportive very swiftly. And I think it's absolutely it's an area where there's agreement across party that this is something we want to get right. So I'd like to ask those who joined us this morning whether they think that £300 is the correct amount, but also more generally, sort of taken it as a whole, is the package of support for young carers in Scotland adequate?
Okay, who'd like to start in relation to that? Don't be shy. Fiona Colley.
Okay. In terms of the wider package of support, I think there's some good options put in there in terms of the cash amount, but also the additional support through the Young Scot card and concessionary travel when it comes. I think it also needs to be seen as part of the package of support through the Carers Act. And through educational maintenance allowance, which I think it is worth pointing out that whilst young carers can get support through that, there is still some inconsistent application of the guidance around the ability for young carers to perhaps not have perfect attendance or have some lateness. In terms of the amount itself, I think that I was drawn to some of the comments by young carers and they have pointed out that it's not a huge amount, and if you compare it to carers allowance, which is near £4,000 per year, it does kind of pale in comparison, but it is a bit of a balance in that it should not provide a perverse incentive for young people to have inappropriate levels of caring. So I think it is a bit of a balancing act, I think.
Okay, thank you. Some other comments and views on that? Lauren, do you want to?
I think it's a good starting point in the sense that previously young carers had nothing, so giving them something is definitely something that is welcomed, because if you think about it, what they're doing is a job. They are essentially working, and if that was someone who worked a full-time job as a carer, they'd be earning a lot more than they would, especially age 16, 17 and 18 when they can get a job. And sometimes they can't because of their caring responsibilities. However, I do think that after a year or so, they should kind of look at feedback from young carers themselves and see what they have to say about it. Because ultimately, everyone around here can say yes, it's the right amount, or no, it's not the right amount. But no one round here is going to get the money, so no one here can safely say if it is the right amount or not.
So it's welcome, but it's a starting point.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments in relation to that, Louise Morgan?
Yeah, we would agree with that. It is really a good start, and we're very supportive of the Young Carer Grant. But again, if you do look at the 16-hour eligibility criteria and look at how much that is per hour, and £300, it's only 36 pence per hour. And what does that say about how we value our young people? Even doubling the amount that is proposed to £600 would cost the Scottish Government an additional £500,000. £1 million puts £1 million in total. It'd be an additional £500,000. And the Scottish security budget is 2.7 billion. So we think that we maybe could be a wee bit more generous to our young people, and also looking at how that might be paid as well. I don't know if you want to go into that at the moment, or
I'm sure we will look at that in due course.
Yeah.
And feel free to come back in relation to that. But again, a good starting point. Just a starting point.
Yeah.
Who hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet? I don't know if Wilma, do you want to?
To the young people that they've been working with, they agree that it's good. It's good that people are thinking about them now, because I think they feel that they're kind of left on their own sometimes, and that it is a good starting point. But they agree that how's it going to be kind of paid, what's the criteria going to be. I think they think it's quite narrow, and some may miss out on the opportunity to kind of access this. And we've been doing stuff in West Lothian to try and get free transport for young carers, because that's something that our young people are very passionate about, and they think that is it 2020, 2021 it's coming out, that'll be a bit too late for the ones that need it now, and it's stopping them. So yeah.
Thank you. And Alan, Lindsay, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing, just to pick up on what Lauren said, the importance of it being the young carers themselves who actually having the say in this as well. I think that's really valuable from our perspective in terms of the wider package. Within Young Scot, we're involved in working with young carers around the Young Carers Vision Panel in terms of looking at how the Young Scot card can be utilised to offer bespoke entitlements for young carers as well. In terms of that wider package, I think the stage of the process that we're in at the moment in terms of engaging with young carers, to just ask them initially kind of what their thoughts are, what the issues are that they are facing, what are some of the barriers they face, and how can something like the Young Scot card be used to help them maybe access opportunities to overcome some of the challenges that they maybe face. We're gathering kind of initial information from the young people at the moment, but certainly by giving them the opportunity, I think that's really valuable, because they're the ones that know their experiences and can really speak about kind of what they need and what they feel is lacking at the moment. And from our perspective, something like the Young Scot card is brilliant because it can allow us to do stuff that is universal for all young people that have the card in Scotland, but we can also tailor it using the technology within the card to make it bespoke, and therefore remove some of the stigma that's perhaps attached with being a young carer, or that they feel there is with being a young carer, by having something that's on the card that can help young people access opportunities, but in a way that doesn't have a big sign saying I'm a young carer attached. I think is a really valuable thing as well. So in terms of that wider package, I think there is still a lot of work there for us all to do, but I think it's promising that the engagement we're having at the moment with young carers is helping to at least make that informed around their kind of their day-to-day and real-life experiences as well.
Alison, do you want to take that forward?
I think just the comments have been really helpful. Lauren was suggesting that perhaps we need to look at this after a year. I think that's a well-made point, that we should just use this as a starting point and see what difference it's made and how much more cash might make. Because, yes, obviously we wouldn't want anyone to think that their efforts were worth 36 pence an hour. I mean, I take on board the point there's a feeling that awareness is being raised. There is recognition that we are now discussing young carers. And I think Fiona Colley, you made a point that was brought home strongly to me when I visited the young carers group in Edinburgh. That point about just understanding in class and at school when young carers arrive late. So that's about having conversations and making sure that the adults that young carers are engaging with understand their family background. Because I met a couple of young carers who, they were almost put off attending school You know, because they found it very difficult sometimes to get in on time because of their caring responsibilities, you know, with parents and others in the morning. So there is far more to this than money. Obviously, that's the thing we're here to discuss this morning. But no, thank you. Those comments are very helpful.
Okay, Fiona, Colin, do you want to add anything to that you were mentioned there?
Yes, I think the awareness in schools is critical. Certainly at the Carers Parliament last month, we heard feedback from young carers, but also from families where there was a young carer in the family, that the issue of young carers being identified in schools but also being supported in schools. I linked it particularly to the education maintenance allowance where there was an issue before. Guidance was changed but it's not happening consistently, and that's about awareness, about schools having full awareness of young carers and being able to support them.
Thank you. Alistair, apologies Alistair, Louise Morgan will take you first.
I was just going to say a little bit more about the young carers in schools and identifying young carers and them self-identifying. I think one of the things that is worrying for us about the grant is around the eligibility criteria, and I know we will come on to that, but I think it is important at this point to mention that the definition of young caring for the purposes of the grant doesn't really go into the detail of young people who may very well be looking after someone who has an addiction or a mental health issue, and those young carers who are more likely to be hidden young carers and less likely to self-identify, and possibly the ones who are worried about coming in late because they then become very visible by walking into a room, you know, when everyone else is already sitting there. And why are you doing that? Because your mum doesn't look as if she's got a physical disability or anything wrong with her to us. So I think that there's a lot of worry and concern around young carers who actually really need the grant being able to self-identify as well.
Do you want to say a little bit more about eligibility criteria? Because I think you'd previously mentioned it in your last comment as well, so you've maybe got some concerns around that. Maybe just be quite helpful just to put on the record quite clearly what those concerns. So what's good about it, but what are your concerns?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of the age group, I think we certainly heard at the Carers Parliament that the age, we feel that the age range is quite narrow, that age 16 to 18 is, and also 18 and in school as well. We feel that all 18-year-olds at least should be entitled to or eligible for the grant. I know that that's to go in hand with the Carers Act around the definitions of young carers there, but we do feel that is quite narrow, and we've had a lot of young carers saying that it's no good it wouldn't be any good to them, sort of thing, at this point in their life, and for 2 years really, how is that going to support them? Going on in terms of the eligibility criteria, but how they assess hours as well, the 16-hour, and we totally understand why you take that figure as well, because it's consistent with other eligibility criteria for other benefits. But it's how do you get that measurement of hours, and we would really hope that would be done sensitively and sensibly, really, and possibly around getting verification as well from the cared for person. And again, I think I'm going back to the group that I mentioned, the young carers who are maybe supporting people with addictions or mental health issues, who actually might not realise that the young carer, the young person, is supporting them to that degree, or even giving any support, and would not want to see their child called a young carer. But I think other people will have more to say about that.
Now, Lauren was nodding her head during that, so we put some of your thoughts around that on the record, if that's okay, Lauren.
Yeah, I won't say too much because I know that question comes up later about eligibility, and there's a bit about, you know, what the tasks they have to undertake to qualify and stuff. You miss out such a large group, especially those who care for someone with something like MS, who, you know, they push themselves to work for as long as possible before they can't. So, but when they come home from work, like, you know, they can't do anything, like they're exhausted, and the young carer steps in, but the fact that they don't have to physically help feed and dress and, do physical tasks, wipes out so many young carers who give emotional support, who give support to those addictions like MS. So like there's not a one shoe fits all kind of thing for young carers. Caring isn't just about the physical tasks you have to undertake, and I think a lot of people forget that there's a lot more to caring than helping mum in the shower, or like feeding someone, or helping someone get dressed. Like, I think that's a very old school term for what a carer is, and a lot of the time it's just listening to what they have to say because they've got no one else to talk to about things.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona Qualley.
I think I'd like to back both those points up wholeheartedly. I don't actually really understand why the definition for the Young Carers Grant around caring is different to the definition around carers allowance. Carers allowance simply talks about the hours of care and that the person has to have a qualifying benefit. This will still require a qualifying benefit, but it requires detailing of what perhaps is pretty intimate care by a young person, but also it misses out that whole section of young carers that Lauren is talking about. So I don't really understand why the definitions at that point around the qualifying criteria are different. I understand why the hours are different, but I don't understand why the criteria is different. It doesn't necessarily
Just before we move on, and Alistair, I'll take you in a little second, could you just put on the record for us a bit more explicit, just so we're clear as a committee, the types of young carers that you think, you just have to speak about it, Lauren, but the types of young carers that might miss out based on the current proposed eligibility criteria? That'd be quite helpful, I think, for the committee.
Well, I would certainly the issues around caring for someone with an addiction, particularly around mental health. But I actually think quite a lot of young carers, part of it is about emotional support, and actually caring in general. A lot is about emotional support and being there for someone. And I think I would particularly point out mental health and addictions, but I think it would be a lot wider for young carers.
It's really, sorry, just to back up Fiona there, in terms of the emotional support, research shows that 82% of young carers say that emotional support is part of their caring role. So I think that's a huge percentage. And certainly I know that giving that type of support is actually sometimes the most difficult type of support to give.
So I don't see other witnesses disagreeing with that, so that's on the record now, and that's helpful for the committee. Alice or Alan, do you want to?
Thanks. Yeah, I realise we might pick up more stuff to do with education later on, but I was just really interested what was said about young carers' experience of school earlier on, and wondered if, Lauren, given your role in representing young carers, anecdotally even, what carers would say now about their experience of school in terms of the awareness and understanding of teachers of the job that carers do.
Obviously, with this, I'm more than happy to give anecdotal references. Like, I'm very open about my experiences. But what I will say is, my experience is very, very, very different to so many people. Like, I was so lucky to have such a fantastic support system from my school. I had a guidance teacher who fully understood what a young carer was, how best to support. She was in touch with my local young carer centre, and she just knew that regardless of what was going on, all she had to do for me was be a listening ear when things were difficult. One experience in particular was the day before my higher modern studies exam in the 6th year. My mum took an anaphylactic reaction in a car driving home, and she was taken to hospital 13 hours before the exam started, and I was supposed to go home and revise, but I also had like 3 younger siblings in the house, and I was like, whoa, okay. So it was something like 5 o'clock at night, and I just phoned my school on the off chance that she was there. She was, and I just told her, and she was like, okay, don't worry, just get some sleep tonight, we'll sort it in the morning. And I went in the morning of my exam, and luckily enough she's a modern studies teacher, and both her and my modern studies teacher sat with me before the exam, and I just spelled out what I knew to them, and they helped fill gaps, and they made me feel confident about going into exams, and they broke questions down for me if I didn't understand, because they knew the night before I couldn't look over notes, and that's what I always do. Like, I always cram. I studied before, but I always cram the night before just to give myself a bit more knowledge. And so for me, like, it's always been a positive experience at school, but I know for a lot of people I represent, it's not the case. They don't like to tell people that are a young carer, if they do, they feel that not all teachers listen. They feel that they can't access things outside of school, like notes, homework, extra support. It's a case of that way for so many. So many people just feel that schools don't listen, they don't understand, they're not aware, that they can't talk to anyone. And that's something that I hear all the time, and I'm sure like the others here will hear the same thing. Like, it's like hitting your head off a brick wall. No one understands, and they don't want to say anything because they know they won't understand.
Yeah, Alistair, do you want to?
No, I'll just open up that conversation if you want to.
Okay, then we've got a whole range of things to explore in our papers here. I'm talking to my MSP colleagues here. I can go through them, but does anyone else wish to take the line of questioning forward? Okay, stunned into silence from my colleagues, thank you very much. Mark Griffin, thank you.
Thanks, Community. We've touched on the number of young carers who won't be eligible, and the figures that we have are that there are 11,000 young carers in Scotland, but only 1,700 will be eligible. So looking at that looks like only 15% of young carers will actually be eligible for that. What are people's views on such a small section of young carers being eligible for this grant?
And of course, who is it that's missing out, of course?
Yep.
In relation to that, it'd be really helpful to know. Lauren, do you want to?
I just want to think of your number of that 1,700 who are eligible, and then I want you to think about, like, of those eligible, who actually has the confidence and knowledge to apply for it. So you've already limited who can apply for it with the criteria, but you have to think about who knows how to apply for it, who has the confidence in themselves and recognises themselves as a young carer enough to qualify for it in order to receive it, because you're already narrowing your numbers down more and more as you go with who will apply, because not all 1,700 will apply for it.
Louise Morgan?
Yeah, I think probably there's also the issue of where there could be two young carers of that age in a family looking after the cared for person. So I think in the regulations we're talking about only one of those being eligible at any one time, so that and I think this was a point that came up at Carers Parliament as well, that a 16-year-old could possibly go for 2 years without actually being recognised as a young carer. And why should we value their caring role less than perhaps the older sibling? So I think that could be a body of people that could miss out on young carer grant just through that part of the eligibility criteria.
Okay, Fiona Colley, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue of 18-year-olds in full-time education, I think that they should be included. It's a key transition point. It's a time when they can't claim carers allowance, and they're too old because they're at college to claim the grant. I think carers allowance is not yet fully devolved, and there's ongoing discussions about whether there would be changes to the full-time study rule. I think the point that Lauren made around a kind of years review, I think in terms of the extension, making sure that it does cover 18-year-olds in full-time education, would be something that we can test again in a year and see where we are with what we're going forward with in terms of carers assistance. I would echo Louise's point around two young carers, but also around someone in the family receiving carers allowance. I think that it doesn't necessarily recognise the complexity of families. There may be a primary carer, perhaps another parent within the house, but as a young person, and I speak from experience in this, as a young person, your life is different, and the things that you have to do are different to other young people, and you still will have a significant caring role within that. Because if you think about carers allowance is 35 hours, there's a lot of other hours within that a young person may be supporting, despite there being someone else who is receiving carers allowance within the family.
Okay, any other comments on that? Alan, do you want to come in?
Not particularly, really. I suppose just to raise, I suppose, from our point of view in terms of the work that we've been doing, particularly around the Young Scot National Entitlement Card and the additional support there for young carers, is that while it is, kind of closely aligned to the stuff around the grant, and the two kind of do inform each other, it is kind of runs parallel. It's not the grant in terms of the work that we're doing. So that's not something that we have been engaging with the young people around specifically. So just from that perspective, just say that's not something that I can add on.
Okay, Mark, do you want to develop that further?
The purpose of the Young Carers Grant from the government consultation is to provide support during the key transition period in young carers' lives to help improve their health and education outcomes as they move into the adult world. That purpose would seem to apply to all young carers, all 11,000 young carers. And we've already set out some of the restrictions, which is then limiting the eligibility to just 15%. So I think whether that's in a year's time or actually whether we look at that before we roll out the grant, I think we need to recognise that the purpose of the grant applies to all 11,000 young carers, and that's something possibly we should look at in our response to the government.
So who are the young carers that don't? Now, we kind of know from the 16 to 17-year-olds who might not qualify because of the criteria, 18-year-olds in full-time education who are not at school. Are there other groups who make up the shortfall who wouldn't be reached by the Young Carers Grant that maybe we've not spoken about yet? Just so we'd be clear, are we talking about carers who, because of their younger age, is that part of that missing group? Who is it that's not? Who is it we're not reaching? Because Mark's quite rightly said there's an estimated 11,000 or whatever carers, and the majority of them won't get the financial support. So who else is it that wouldn't get the financial support, just so that we're clear about it as a committee? Louise Morgan.
Sorry. Yeah. Really, again, just to emphasise, in terms of the eligibility criteria, that the cared for person must be in receipt of the disability allowance, and again, those groups that I spoke about before, the addictions and perhaps people who have mental health issues that maybe haven't been formally identified, and that can actually be sometimes a much more onerous caring role for the young person, because they don't maybe have that support in the community for the person that they look after, but they're definitely young carers, and I think that will actually be quite a number of young carers. I think if we look at our young carer services and the number of young carers who come from a home where there is a disability allowance going in, there'll probably still be a substantial number of young people attending those services.
Petition with that question. I just want to make sure the committee properly understands where the gaps are and who those individuals are. Michelle Ballantyne, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My great concern with this has been the fact that actually the majority of young carers that I've worked with and come across actually don't have parents that have a registered disability that allows them to get the allowances that would qualify young carers for this grant. And I think that is something, a lot of them are in touch with young carers organisations or getting support, and then there's a whole lot that aren't in touch with anybody. And I would like to hear from all of you what you feel about that and where you think we stand around that, because often it's those young carers that are in the most difficult position, because the ones that are identified and whose parents identified often get more wraparound support already, because their parents are already being supported in some way. And also touching back on the emotional side, there is the emotional support that is given, but actually for most young carers that I've had contact, it's the emotional drain that they actually feel, even if they're not physically doing anything. They're often almost paralysed at school some days because they're terrified about what they're going to go home to, and, whether their parents still going to be alive or is going to be lying on the floor unconscious, and often it's that worry that they live with day in, day out that is absolutely exhausting for many of the young people. So I'm just wondering two things really. A, about that qualification bit and the kind of conversations we need to have around that. But B, the other side is around what's proposed is a lump sum, a one-off annual payment to support transition. And I'd just like to hear a little bit about what you feel about that, as opposed to something that is a weekly payment. Because again, some of the feedback I got was the trouble is when you get it in a lump sum, there's a tendency to go out and spend a lump sum on something that you might want. Whereas often the problem is, and I think it's mentioned in our papers, it's having bus fare, it's having, you know, money for lunches every week, because you don't necessarily want to take money off your parent or whatever. So I would just like a wee bit of discussion around that as well, if that's okay.
Okay, any thoughts on that? We'll go to Lauren first.
I have a comment just on the whole lump sum idea. So, personally, I feel that £300 should not be spent on things like bus fares and lunches, and that it should be for a young person to be a young person, because previously they have not had the time or resources to be a young person. So things as simple as going to the cinema, paying for driving lessons, things that every young person should have, that they can't because of their caring role. But also, just want you to think about the fact that a lot of young people are going to get that, and I think sometimes it's going to go back into the family in some way, because it's a source of money that previously hadn't been given. So I feel like giving it as a lump sum isn't the best idea, because that £300 can go straight into the family pot, whereas if it's given over a period of time, they have more of an opportunity to do things on a more regular basis as a young person. So rather than just doing something like once or twice with that £300, if they're getting it over a monthly instalment, that's every month they can do something with their friends, or every month they can achieve something else, like a driving lesson, or like going to the cinema, or going for lunch, or just something that isn't what they would usually do. Whereas the £300, I think you've got to take the perspective of that £300 can go straight into the family pot, and they couldn't see any of it in that sense.
Morgan, did you wanted to come in?
It was really just to pick up on what Michelle said about, you know, young carers coming in and to school and being terrified of what they go home to. But again, we come back to it's this point about identification. When they go to school, coming from backgrounds as we're just talking about, sometimes they're actually terrified of being identified as well, as a young carer. You know, so again, that's a population, you know, that are missing out, that really would be terribly afraid to come forward and identify that they had a caring role.
Okay. Fiona Cawley?
Just on the issue of qualifying criteria, and the issue around the person has to have a qualifying disability benefit, it is a balance, to be honest, between something that's relatively simple in terms of any social security system. So that's a clear identifying point. You know, potentially there are other ways to identify young carers, for example, through young carer services, through schools. But I think there is the issue that the those who are hidden potentially still remain as hidden as they are just now, and I think it's a difficult balance, because I don't know if we would be able to identify all those hidden young carers that could benefit. We may over time, but potentially that's another piece of work that needs to be carried out in terms of schools, in terms of the Carers Act, in terms of further education as well. So there's almost, as I said, it's that simplicity versus complexity, and whether we would actually reach the aim of reaching those hidden young carers.
Wilma, yes.
I do think I agree with Louise and Fiona, but I also think, you know, we are a lot better in raising awareness of young carers than we were like 10 or 15 years ago, but I think we've still got a long way to go. I think, you know, it needs to be part of you know, some training as well, you know, in colleges and universities for staff coming through, for schools, for nurses. Although that's getting done, it's not something that's done consistently over universities and colleges. I think it needs to be done a bit more. I know there's lots of good kind of other young carers projects out there doing a lot of good work to raise awareness, but it just seems to be like chipping away, where it's the same people that are referring. You know, some teachers don't think it's important for them to know about some of this information and stuff like that. Obviously, that's just my experience. We're doing a big kind of work in West Lothian now in all the high schools. but it's difficult to get kind of the top people to kind of listen as well a little bit. It's the guidance teachers, it's the teachers that are kind of on the floor that are always referring to us, that are aware of us. It's the ones that don't. We need to kind of be doing stuff about that as well to kind of try and identify some of these hidden young carers.
Just to say that at Carers Trust Scotland, we now have a project that are working with all the universities in Scotland and the further education institutions to support them to have a recognising Student Carers Award. So that piece of work has begun, and we would hope that we would be helping to raise awareness among the staff in the further and higher institutions to raise awareness among the staff themselves, but also for them to help to identify student carers and to make them sort of carer-friendly institutions as well, to develop policies to identify and support within education institutions. So, we do hear from staff within the education within colleges and universities that there are bursaries for instance, cared for and looked after student carers, but there's nothing there really specifically for student carers. And we feel that this is something that probably needs to be addressed as well. Maybe not for today's conversation, but maybe just to be noted.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to go to that, Alan? Yes.
Please. Just I suppose to add to all of that, really, some of the things that some of the young carers that we've been engaging with around the sort of additional packages have been mentioning have been just some of those things. The fact, whether it's in education or in their workplace or socially, that often there's not the understanding that there maybe should be, and it's often not even the fault of the other people, I suppose, but just in terms of people either not taking them seriously or not understanding them. And in terms of the monetary side of things as well, I suppose one of the things that some of the young carers have mentioned in terms of relation to education, which I think, Louise, you were touching on there, was just the fact that actually sometimes it can be really basic things like stationery, resources, textbooks, stuff that we probably all take for granted, that actually they cost money. And there's a barrier there as well for young carers in terms of accessing those basic things that they maybe need, which then perhaps has another knock-on effect as well in terms of the education.
Okay, Lauren, did you want to go in?
I do, yeah. Just touching on Louise's point about universities and colleges. And I fully understand that this is about the Young Carer Grant and it's to align with the criteria of a young carer. But one of the questions actually states that should young carers in full-time further or higher education be entitled to the grant? As a young adult carer in full-time further or higher education, I do feel as though we should be entitled to the grant. I'm 19, I'm at university, I'm a full-time carer, I work part-time and don't have a social life. There is nothing for me to claim as a young person who cares while in full-time education. I cannot claim carers allowance, I cannot claim this grant because I'm too old. There is not a specific bursary from SAS that I'm entitled to as a student carer. There is what's called a dependence grant, however that is very difficult to claim and you're only entitled to it if the cared for person depends on you financially, not in terms of the level of care you provide. It's all about financially being dependent. So I would fully support something further in the line for those of us who are working our way through university, because I dropped out last year. Things were too difficult for university. The course was difficult. I was managing a caring role from the other side of the Central Belt. I was working and things just got too much and I couldn't do it. So I moved home and I've started again at a different university, and that's wasted a year of SAS funding for me because I wasn't correctly supported. Now I still find it difficult being at home because I'm doing more caring, but I still have to work because there's nothing that can relieve that pressure. So I think while it's great that you're starting with this age group of young carers, when they're getting something when they're at school, but when they come into further and higher education, age 18, 19, 20, they're back to having nothing and they're back to struggling their way through education without anything. And you'd be surprised at the dropout rate of student carers in universities because it's staggeringly low.
Sharing your own experience there as well, but obviously that will extend to other people across the country, so it's important to put that on the record. Fiona Colley, I'll take you first, and then sure I'll come.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I support what Lauren says, and certainly as a minimum think that this grant should be available to people who are 18 in full-time education. I think there is that bigger point around supporting young adult carers in university and college, but actually all carers to be able to develop their skills and knowledge and their aspirations. And I think that was the point I was making around, carers allowance will be fully devolved in time. What changes can we make that makes that better for young adult carers and for adult carers as well? But, there may be something that within that we need to look at this to be something that's an interim solution for young people. Above 18, that there's a possibility of doing that. I think that would be really good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Sean Robinson.
Good morning. I just wanted to explore what Lauren was saying a little further. I think you make a compelling case, and there does appear to be a bit of a gap there with regard to student carers. But what you described was two things. One, that on principle, you believe the Young Carers Grant should be extended to student carers, and I understand the reasons why. But I'm wondering how much support and discussion young carers in your position making life choices had, because it seems to me that trying to juggle full-time caring, a job, and moving to another town for university, did you get much support prior to making those decisions? Do you think that would have been helpful? So is there something else beyond Young Carers Grant, which I know is the focus of our discussion, but should there be a more structured support for young carers making that transition to help discuss through some of those? Because it sounds as if you were almost set up to fail in some ways, and through your own resilience have managed to get back on track, but it sounds as if it's been quite a challenging experience for you.
That is a difficult question. I wouldn't say in the sense I was set up to fail, because I received a lot of support prior going to university, and while at university from my young carers group. They've known me since I was 8. I was identified quite early, and from that age I've always said I want to go to university, I want a degree, I want to be the first in my family to get a degree. That was a big push for me, and it still is. It's not so much about I was set up to fail, it's more the challenges that occurred during my first year at university pushed me back. I had great support, but I made the decision myself not to return, and I made the decision myself about what was best for me, and I was supported to try and stay, and supported in the sense that that there'll be more support for you here, but at the end of the day I felt it was right for me and my role. It's not the case that I was set up to go to university and all support left. It was a personal decision, and I truly believe I made the right one. But it's what crops up during the year that people don't see. Like, it could be a great year, like my freshers week in my first 3 months, amazing. I had the best time. I was a proper student. Like, this was a life I'd never had before. I was like, whoa, I'm going out on a Tuesday night. I was living, and but then things happened and things came out of control, and it became really busy at home, and I wasn't at home to deal with it, and then I started to freak out because I was like, oh, hang on, I'm not at home to deal with this, who's dealing with this? And then I made the responsibility as a young person to take that role back on, even though I was miles away. So I think it's not so much that I'm set up to fail, it's more it's the person's choice.
I mean, it sounds as if you made the right choices for you at that time. I guess I'm thinking of young people generally leaving home and going to college or university can face some similar challenges, but in addition to that you obviously had the pressures and worries at home. So I mean, are there you said you got some support from as a student carer. Would you agree? There's obviously been some comments made around the table about whether or not that is structured enough, whether or not every student carer would have that same experience. So in your view, do you think that's something that needs to be looked at on a more structured basis to make sure every college, every university has that support? Sometimes the decision will be that it's not possible for the person to remain, but in some cases with proper support it might have been a different outcome.
I do believe that every college, university should have a structured level of support, so that it's not a case of a postcode lottery of support you're getting. Like, you should get the same amount of support regardless of what institution you go to. Like, that should just be a given. You shouldn't get a better level of support because you go to Stirling, or you shouldn't get a better level of support just because you go to, Aberdeen. Like, everyone should be entitled to the same amount of emotional support with their role. I couldn't imagine it not being like that. It just seems unfair. But I think that one of the biggest things is that financial support. The fact is that, if you're living away from home, you still have to pay your accommodation fees, which is what your SAS covers, and then you're left with literally nothing, so you have to work. And if that was alleviated, then you have more time to do things as a young person. And as a part of the Scottish Youth Parliament, I passed a motion a few weeks ago that states the Scottish Youth Parliament believes that carers' allowance should be extended to young adult carers aged 16 to 25 in full-time education, and that is that is something that for sure should be given. Just because you're in education, you shouldn't be made to choose between wanting to better yourself or making sure the right support's at home. You should be worked with both financially and emotionally to ensure that they two can go hand in hand, and you can still provide the support needed, but you can still better your life, and you can still break this, what I call as a cycle of care, which is where a young carer will go into a care related job because it's what they know well. They go into jobs like nursing, teaching, like even just as a full-time carer, because that's what all they know. It's about ensuring that they can explore their options, that they could be a scientist, an artist, or they could do anything. Just because they're a carer, it doesn't mean that they have to stick to that lane, that there's more things for them to branch out into. And I think with the emotional support and the financial support going hand in hand, they can achieve that.
Really fascinating discussion. Just two seconds, Michelle. Just apologies. I would like in a wee second. Just when I was listening to that, and it's maybe not one for this committee, but I know through constituency casework, SAS will only give so many years public funding for degrees, and that can lead to people having to self-fund in future years. And I've had to make representations on behalf of constituents for exception and discretion to be shown for additional years of public funding for university degrees and the like to be taken into account. When you decided that it was right for you and your family at that time to not progress with your degree at that time for your caring responsibilities and everything else, did SAS indicate at any point, were they aware that's why was there a process you could go through to indicate the reason you didn't complete that particular year at university was because of caring needs and responsibilities? In other words, so that when you get into your senior honours year, you could be told, well, actually, you've had your 4 years, you have to pay, you have to self-fund that. And I hope you go to your MSP and discretion assuring you don't have to self-fund that. But was there any guidance or support given to you about what the issues would be in relation to that?
So I was lucky. I was determined that I finished that first year. So I used a full year funding, and I got, the relative qualification from that. But so I've used 1 year of funding, which means in this degree I'm not going to go for the full honours. I'm just going to get the 360 credit degree, because I eventually I want to go on and be a teacher, even though I'm teaching that young carers should break this cycle. But I feel that I'm going into a STEM related subject. I want to be a computing teacher and empower females into that field, and also as a carer I'm more empathetic in that role, and I can, as I have been a young carer, I feel like being a teacher would allow me to make more of a difference in the education field. But you don't need the full honours to go and get your teaching degree. You just need the 360 credits. So that's what I'm going to do, purely on the basis of funding and time.
suspect do incredibly well, but there could be wider SAS issues for young carers that maybe this committee has to signpost to the Education Committee or others in relation to that. Really helpful for us to understand what the barriers are and how you cope with that. Michelle Ballantyne, apologies, I had cut you off there. Michelle,
Yeah.
like to come in?
I just wanted to ask a point of clarification on your commentary around having the sort of grant extended over that sort of 18 to 25 period. Do you mean in relation to anybody who is a young carer, or do you mean in relation to people who remain at home to continue that young carer, as opposed to, say, when you first went away and were not living at home? Just wanted to ask whether that was for everybody or just those that remained living at home with the parent.
First thing is that it's not anything. So the 18 to 25 bracket are not classed as young carers, and as someone in that age bracket, I like to make that clear. We are young adult carers, and that is often mislooked at. We're often either seen as young carers or adult carers, and it's nothing against, what you're saying. It's just, I just like to make that point because it's a completely different caseload, completely different needs, completely different, everything to a young carer. However, I do feel it should be given to anyone. Even though you move away, you can still partake in your caring role, especially if it's an emotional caring role. So, if, mum's on the phone at 9 o'clock at night, having a breakdown because what's going on, you're there to listen to that even though you're not in the home. If it's your brother you care for and, it's the same way round, he's on the phone, he's not sure what to do, he's confused, he's someone to talk to, you're still there for them even though you're not at home. Like, the caring role doesn't stop because you're not in the house. The caring role is a constant. Even like being at home, you're still worried about them, you're still thinking about them, you're still doing little things to help, you're still going home as much as possible. So it shouldn't be a case of only a certain number of young people can claim this. It should be a blanket term for everyone. Everyone should be able to claim it the same way. It shouldn't be a pick and choose thing, like you care enough, you don't care enough, so you can't, or you live at home and you don't live at home, or you only care 10 hours but you care 25. Like, it should just be a universal thing for everyone. And I think the fact it's not shows that it's, some young carers are kind of looking at each other like, well, why can you get it if I can't? And, well, if I can't get it, then why can you get it? We're doing a similar role. And you're just kind of sparking that between the young people themselves. They're thinking about what makes them different to me. Like, we're the same, we're both young carers. So you're opening up a wider conversation amongst young carers themselves, which isn't helpful.
Can I expand that slightly?
You can, yes.
Okay. Because that sort of leads me nicely into the question around siblings and entitlement beyond one person. So, I mean, for example, you mentioned earlier you've got 3 younger siblings, and obviously as you all grow up, presumably they're taking on roles as well, or not. Well, in some families, obviously, it might be split. But how would you, and I suppose I've widened this to everybody really, how would you see it in terms of multiple young people in the family? Do they all get it? Do they split it? Where do we go with that? Because I think that's going to be an issue for some families as well.
I'm also conscious of the last 10 questions or something.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Has all been directed towards yourself. So why don't we see if others get comments first? Give you a chance to get your breath back, because I kind of just feel as if I've been throwing questions constantly at you. But we'll take you in as part of this discussion. Fiona Colley.
Yeah, I don't really see a reason why other young carers in household couldn't also receive the grant. I don't necessarily think it needs to be split. I think as an individual, each one is providing a caring role. As long as they are providing that caring role, that should be enough. I know that there's some young carers in the experience panels talked about splitting the grant. I'm not entirely sure about that, but that there are some examples of perhaps having a higher pot, an increased pot. Winter fuel payments is an example of that. There's a range of payments depending on your age and circumstances. So that there could be something around that. I would say it's probably a lot less complex just to pay individual young carers if there's more than one sibling that's providing care. I think that's probably easier and simpler for a system rather than trying to do split payments.
idea how many that would involve? Because one of the things about any social security system is certainty where possible and clarity for budgeting purposes. So do we know how many households that might involve? Okay, maybe one for us to ask the government. That's fine. Any other general comments? Lauren, did you want to come back in?
While I said that, my younger siblings don't take, a role, they don't take a role in the terms that I do. They do little things, which helps. And if I'm not there, it trickles down to the next eldest. And if they're not there, it trickles down again. But we also collectively do care for one of our siblings. So one of my younger siblings has autism, and, that's a caring role that we all provide. And I think that restricting it to only me being, I'm not even entitled to it, but my brother, who would be entitled to it, saying, no, you can't because your sister, she already provides care and you're not the primary carer, and that, it just isn't fair. It's like saying, again, it's almost like a postcode lottery, but in your own house. It's like saying, well, only you can get it, you do the most and you're the eldest, but there's still 2 younger siblings who are dealing with more than they should for their age. I feel like it should be given to everyone because, again, it should be a universal blanket case.
We're coming towards the end of our evidence session this morning. There's one specific question I know we haven't asked yet that's in our notes, which I'll ask in a second, but I'm just wondering, the conversation we had earlier on about, I'll take it in a wee second, Alice. It's just I was conscious that we spoke about the £300, irrespective of whether that's enough or not enough, getting that in the lump sum or getting £25 once a month, for example. I think Lauren had been suggesting that it might be more meaningful because the £300 appears in the household, it'd be mopped up by family debts or other issues, whereas a smaller amount more regularly you could do something with it, go for a night out or whatever. But I'm just wondering whether or not the thoughts would be, does it have to be one or the other, or should a degree of choice be able to be given to the young carer, whether they would get the £300 or whether they would want a monthly payment? And it's just a second thing on top of that, is it's okay to say to someone, okay, there's £25 once a month and you might want to go to the pictures with your pals and go for a burger after it. My goodness, £25 doesn't cover that these days, really, does it? But you need to make sure mum or dad or wee brother or wee sister at home is okay, or you're not going to go out in the first place. So there has to be a connectivity between local carer services, whether it's respite care or whoever coming into the household, to support the young carer and cared for person, to allow them to go out and actually use the relatively small amount of money to just enjoy being a young person. So 2 things on that really. 1, should it be a choice whether you take the lump sum or a monthly payment? And 2, should that have to coordinate with local services to allow you to actually use the money in a meaningful way? I know there's a lot in that. Sorry, Fiona Colley.
I think certainly, ideally, young people should have the choice of what works for them. I think definitely about how we connect in with carers services and that young people, it's early days in terms of the Carers Act, but that young people's young carers statement actually plans for breaks for young people. I know that some carer centres have time to live funds, and young people can apply for it's a grant that enables them to look at breaks or other things, and that in some areas they've been using that for spot purchasing. But the links need to be really strong to enable there to be a real purpose and an improvement in life for young people. Can I just highlight one thing that's a little concern, is around bank accounts and how many young people will have a bank account or a credit union account in order for the grant to be paid, whether it's in a lump sum or monthly. And I think it's something that needs to be explored, particularly for where, in the most disadvantaged households, there's likely to be, there's a lesser uptake in terms of knowledge and understanding of banking and of accounts. So there's a balance in there, ensuring that young people have the information about how to open an account, or do we need to look at third party, perhaps carer services, supporting those young carers who don't have bank accounts and being able to help in that way. So I just wanted to highlight that as something.
No, that's helpful. Any other comments along that with themes? Louise Morgan.
Nothing really to add, but just to really support what Fiona said. I mean, ideally, you know, in this, we would like to see young carers having the choice about how the payments were made. And again, just to come back to my first point, that we would like to see it being a larger sum of money and possibly making, you know, maybe 2 annual payments of £300, maybe at you know, around the way that the carer allowance supplement is being administered around sort of summertime, when people are likely to want some money, or you're maybe going off to university or leaving university or changing your life in some way, and around Christmas time might be helpful.
Point well made. Before we move on to Alison Johnson, any other comments in relation to that? Lauren, did you want to come back in or take it in a wee second, Alan? Lauren?
Just about the whole like respite thing, and I do feel like every young person should be given, you know, the chance to go out, even if that means respite come in and help. But I think that's the issue. I think that is an issue like around both terms of payments, around the £300 and the monthly payment, because regardless if they want to go out, they're going to have a bit of initial support in the household. One thing I will say about the lump sum is I don't think that the young carers are likely to spend that as well as they would a monthly payment, because they know that £300 is all they've got, so they're going to try and make it last as long as they can. Whereas like a monthly payment system would allow them, you know, well, you know, every month they got this coming in, they can do something, or they can save it, so every few months to do something. But definitely like give them the choice. You shouldn't make that decision for them. It's for them to make what's best for them.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, I think just on top of that, I think, again, I know the main focus has been around the grant, as it should be today, but just in terms of the additional package and of entitlements that are being worked on as well, I think it just highlights the importance of that in terms of, you know, non-monetary support for young carers as well, whether it's discounts to allow maybe the money to go a little bit further, whether it's access to opportunities, whether it's an opportunity to share further information to help young carers make those informed decisions about what they want to do and what they want to access. I think that's really important. And also in terms of the comments around you know, bank accounts as well, I think that's a really valid point. And I think there's an opportunity there, I think, in terms of the wider package to try and share that information with young carers, and also to utilise things like the Young Scot card, which can be used to help open up bank accounts, which for young people who perhaps maybe don't always have the necessary passport or documentation they need to be able to open up something official like that. You know, the Young Scot card can be used for that purpose as well. So I think the wider package is really important here. I don't think the two things stand alone. I think they support each other. And I think it's important that we continue to involve the young people in that, to make sure that those entitlements are things that they'll actually use, not just things that we think would be good for you.
Okay, thank you. Alison Johnson.
Yeah, just a couple of other points, one of which we've touched on was that issue of respite. You know, you may, even if the funding's in place, if you want to go out for the night, if you don't have siblings or others who can take on your responsibilities, you know, do you think there's a need to fund respite properly? That'd be my one question. And earlier on you spoke about barriers. You know, you were saying there are 11,000 young people who are caring, but 1,700 are eligible. How many of them are claiming? And I know from my own, actually I was dealing with a case yesterday where someone is no longer getting carers allowance because the person they care for is no longer deemed eligible for the disability benefit they were getting, even though their condition, you know, remains fairly serious. Just wondered if any of that had been discussed amongst young carers, the fact that, you know, the people you're caring for, in some cases, may be facing reductions in their benefits. So just those two issues, barriers and respite.
Yes, of course.
I do believe that respite should be properly funded, because it's both respite for the young person, but like themselves to go away, but also for them to be able to go out in their own local community, because they don't get any opportunity to be a young person. They can't, you know, interact with their peers as well as, you know, anybody else in their class can. I think it's important that we look at them as a young person first before they look at them as a young carer, because they should be entitled to the same things that every other young person's entitled to, and that's, you know, free time. And that's one thing like I wish I did more of, is during my secondary school years, was go out, because I didn't really. And my younger brother can now, and you know, I see him, like, he goes out a lot, and I see how much like fun he has, interaction with his peers he has, and I never did that. And that's one thing I think if I could tell myself when I was younger to do, I definitely would look into that more, because it's just so important for like personal growth, is to interact with your peers as much as possible. Just to touch on your second question on barriers, I think for the young person, I do think it is always a worry about, you know, the benefit that the cared for person receives, because you know, that's money coming into the family, and that has an add-on effect to them. Like they're also worried about that. In terms of them not being able to claim carers allowance because of it, is somewhat irrelevant because of their age and their education status. So it wouldn't affect them being able to wouldn't affect them being able to claim carers allowance, because they won't be able to claim carers allowance because of their education. So that has no knock-on effect, but it might affect them being able to claim this one-off benefit. However, if it doesn't affect them at the time of claimancy, then they'll still get the money, and since it's not like a monthly payment just now anyway, then it won't affect them getting the money, because as long as they still receive the benefit required to claim carers allowance at the time of claiming at the time of claiming the young carer grant, it shouldn't affect them. At least that's my understanding of it.
Alison, did you want to?
Yeah, just sort of on that point, if there was one thing, you know, the Scottish Government, I'm you know, very pleased to hear, are placing a focus on ensuring that people who are entitled to any benefit get it, because we know there's a lot of unclaimed benefit in the UK. If there was one way of reaching young carers, what do you think we should be focusing on?
What do you mean by that? Like,
well, for people who don't even know that there's such a thing as a young carers grant, how can we make sure that people understand their entitlements and are better helped to access them?
I think it's just about education at the end of the day. Like, but the issue with that just now is you don't want to over-educate, because you just find too many, you know, gaps where they can't claim. So you're going to educate all these young people about this grant, and it's amazing, and you know, this is something they've never been able to receive before, but you can't claim it, you might be able to, you can, and you definitely can't. So I think it's just about looking at your criteria and educating to the right amount, if you know what I mean. You know, not overselling it in the sense that everyone's going to be able to claim it, but enough that there's a general understanding that this exists. I think a lot of that will come to your carer centres across Scotland. You know, they work with the young people directly, or at least most of the young people who directly who attend the service. So I think they should be your first port of call, because they'll know themselves with the young people they deal with who will be entitled to it. So I think if you build a stronger network with the likes of like Louise at Carers Trust, they like a partnership with loads of carer centres across Scotland, and they'll be able to best tell you how they engage with the young people and who to engage with, because if you go about it almost the wrong way, then you just have a lot of young people who are disappointed, and you don't want that.
Okay, so a targeting of the education to make sure we're not saying to everyone, look, there's this new young carers grant, and raise expectation for those who won't meet the criteria. So a targeting of that, I think that's pretty clear. There was a question that we had in our notes that I want to ask just for completeness. So one of the issues the Scottish Government had with the Best Start grant, which I wanted to talk about today, was whether you were able to give that to those with no recourse to public funds. In particular, we're talking about those with no full residency rights within the country. The Scottish Government has grappled with that a little bit in relation to the Young Carers grant, and our notes tell us that, you know, obviously if a young person is within a family whose immigration status is uncertain, by seeking to give them cash can actually put their residency in the country at risk in the first place. But what I've got down here, and I want to just ask it so we can get on the record people's views, whether people here think the Scottish Government should seek an exception to the no recourse to public funds requirements for the Young Carers Grant, as it is hoping to do with the Best Start Grant in relation to that. So the young carers in this country whose immigration status is uncertain, they won't currently be covered by this. Should they be covered by this, and should the Scottish Government ask for that exception as they are doing with the Best Start Grant? So something on the record with that would be really helpful. I'll take Fiona Colley first, and I'll come back to you, Lauren.
Yes, I think caring transcends nationality, immigration status, but of course that exception needs to be sought, because the last thing we would want to do by trying to do something that was good for young carers in that situation was to actually risk someone's immigration status. So I think, yes, if we can get an exception.
Lauren, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point that I said quite a few times that it should be a universal thing, that it shouldn't matter. I mean, obviously, like, if we can take into account that it won't affect their immigration status, because the last thing that I'd want is someone not being able to, be anywhere because they've claimed money. But if you take that aside and look at them again as a young person who has a responsibility, they shouldn't be denied it just because of their immigration status. Like, they should be given it the same way that I would be given it, or the next person would be given it, because young carers, carers in general, help save, I think it's £100 billion annually, which is the cost of a second NHS. And they're a cog in that wheel. They all, like, while they're not fully, their status isn't secure in the country, they're still helping to save that money within the country. So they're still part of that wheel, that cog. They're still providing emotional support, physical care. They shouldn't be targeted because they're not fully seated in the country yet. That just isn't fair.
Nodding heads with that. Does anyone disagree with that who are witnesses here today? So the rest of you do agree. Feel free to put something on the public record if you wish in relation to that, or else we'll just note that there's general agreement. Anyone want to add to that? No? Well, time is almost upon us. I think we've had good value this morning with the discussions that we've had. If anyone here has something that they wanted to say and that you don't think that the way the conversation's developed, you've been able to say that, feel free just now to put something on the record. You'll be more than welcome to. Fiona Colley.
Yeah, I know I'm not backwards of it coming forwards, but I did want to put on the record around the issue of concessionary travel, and that is linked only to receipt of the Young Carers Grant, and I actually think it should be linked to the Young Scot card criteria. I think actually, see if you think a bit of an example where schools now have said, I think quite a lot of schools is like you don't get free transport unless you live more than 2 miles away. But if you're a young carer trying to come back home because you've got a caring responsibility and your family income is low, you may not be able to afford to get the bus to speed that up. And I think concessionary travel, that's just an example, I think concessionary travel should be wider than just those in receipt of the Young Carers Grant.
That's helpful. Lauren, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to have a quick point, again, just referring to the Scottish Youth Parliament's policy. Concessionary travel is something very close to my heart, and I just feel like I shouldn't be made to pay a £13 return ticket home as much as as much as I have to because I have to. I shouldn't be made to pay that train ticket that's costing me 3 hours work, 2 hours work, because I have to go home. SYP, I passed a motion that I presented here in the Scottish Parliament in October 2017, stating that the Scottish Youth Parliament believes that concessionary or free transport should be provided for both young and young adult carers. It shouldn't be restricted again to just the young carers. That passed with 96% backing of the membership, which means that 96% of Scotland's young people supported that. And I think that's too loud of a voice to ignore, that should just be a given. They shouldn't just... it shouldn't be a postcode lottery, and that it should be given to everyone, not just a select few.
Thank you. think time is probably upon us. I mean, I can indulge people further if they're really desperate to put something else on the record. I'm not looking at Fiona Colley at this point at all. Right.
Could I just...
Louise Morgan.
So it's just one thing when Shona mentioned the services to support young adult carers, and just to say that the Carers National Strategy had a chapter around young adult carers specifically, and within the Carers Act there really isn't anything specific, and I think that was a disappointment for young adult carers in Scotland, and I understand why. It's around the legal definition, and there's that cut-off. But I think what we have seen over the last few years in terms of services that would have been able to support Lauren in the situation that she found herself, making decisions about what would be good for me at this point. To I have always wanted to go to university, but that advice and guidance that young adult carer services were previously in place in Scotland, but through lack of funding have kind of dwindled, and there really aren't so many dedicated support services for that age group now. So really I think that's maybe part of the package that we should be looking at as well.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to make the same offer again. That's really important to put that in the record, but we do at some point, unfortunately, have to close this particular evidence session. I just wanted to maximise your opportunity to put things on the public record. I'm pretty sure that you've done that today, so can I thank all our witnesses, and that concludes agenda item 2. And when we move to agenda item 3, Scottish Government consultations, which were previously agreed to take in private. So we're going to move into private session. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.